I want to start by asking you about today, because it seemed like we had a development overnight when Jean-Claude Juncker said that there would be a decision on Greece by the end of June, implying that maybe there would be a second rescue package for Greece. The euro rallied to a 3-week high, European stocks rallied, even US stocks rallied. Was this a correct interpretation?
Jean-Claude Juncker is the president of the Eurogroup finance ministers, and he certainly knows what he's talking about. In fact, we are currently working on in order to shortly conclude the negotiations in Athens concerning the fiscal targets of this year, 2011, and concerning the launch of the privatization program. Once that is done, we can discuss, and we have to discuss next steps, how to ensure that the Greek reforms and adjustment will continue, and how to ensure that financial stability is maintained in Greece and in Europe.
So let's start with this week, on the ground, the IMF, the EU, and the ECB on this progress report. Is there a chance that the next slice of the bailout package will not be transferred to Greece? Is that realistic?
I'm confident that we will be able to conclude the talks in the coming days in Athens between the EU IMF Troika and the Greek government. In fact, the negotiations have not been easy, they have been quite difficult, but at the same time we have made progress now in the recent days, and as I said, I'm confident that we can come to a conclusion in the coming days to conclude the quarterly review and then facilitate a disbursement of the next tranche in June.
Why has that been difficult?
It's been partly because there has been some slippage concerning the fiscal targets of this year, which is largely related to the smaller tax revenues than expected and somewhat weaker economic growth. So this meant that the fiscal deficit was higher than it should have been according to the program, and therefore Greece needs to fill the gap so that it will meet the fiscal target of around 7% this year. And it's always difficult to agree on very concrete measures of fiscal consolidation, which will have an impact on the people's lives.
Several European officials, including yourself, have said that a total restructuring is completely off the table for Greece. So then, would you be willing to consider a second aid package to avoid a near-term restructuring?
In fact, what is essential now is that we first agree on the fiscal targets on the privatization program, and then once that is done, we see the medium term in terms of how Greece will achieve primary structural surplus, in other words, stop living beyond its means, which is a necessary condition of any further decision. Second, we need to see a very convincing plan of the privatization program and its implementation in the coming years. And third, yes, we are considering a Vienna-Style initiative of how banks could voluntarily maintain their exposure in Greece. And in that context, we are also examining the feasibility of voluntary rescheduling, which would not create a credit event. But debt restructuring is not on the table, it's not in the cards, and it will not be part of our agenda.
And the Vienna initiative is not in any way debt restructuring?
No.
It's extending the deadline.
It would imply this kind of Vienna-style initiative would imply possibly a voluntary rescheduling of the loans and their maturities so that it would not create the so-called credit event. This is the way we see that this could contribute on its part to the overcoming the Greek immediate challenges, and Of course, in parallel, Greece will have to implement its privatization program to reach the target of 50 billion euros, which represents over 20% of GDP of Greece, and thus would have a very significant impact on reducing the formidable debt burden of Greece.
How far is Greece from those targets?
Greece is about to start the privatization program. There has been a list presented of the first companies to be privatized, and this will be part of the second phase of the negotiations, how the privatization program will be implemented and what kind of guarantees the European Union and its member states, in other words Greece's partners, will have that this will succeed and will indeed be done.
The Vienna Initiative, I know it's being considered for Greece, but if it had to come to other countries beyond Greece, you've seen the contagion effect, would it work for Ireland? Would it work for Portugal?
In fact, in the Portuguese program, the EU-IMF program for Portugal, there is already a provision implying the possibility of this kind of, say, Vienna-Style initiative, and this is now in the Portuguese context a real possibility. I would, however, not want to jump the gun. It's still premature to go to any concrete detail because we are currently negotiating both in Athens, in Vienna, where the Economic and Financial Committee is meeting, and of course in Brussels and between Brussels, Athens and the EU capitals. So let's come back to this in a few days or a few weeks once we are somewhat wiser on the outcome of these talks.
Are the Germans on board with this Vienna Initiative?
To my knowledge, all the Euro area member states are on board in examining the feasibility of a Vienna-style initiative.
Is it frustrating at all that there are so many competing voices within Europe? For instance, today there was a report that the Germans are now open to not having an immediate restructuring of Greek debt or Greek profile. I mean, it's hard to sort of follow all the commentary. Is that difficult for you?
It may be frustrating to the so-called market forces and
the journalists.
Sometimes, and the journalists. On the other hand, you get even too good raw material out of that.
That's true.
For us policymakers, yes, certainly we could do with somewhat stronger verbal discipline, which we are actually, I think, learning the hard way. Having said that, it's in a way part and parcel of decision making in the European Union. We have 27 member states in the Union, 17 in the Euro area, and they are the decision makers in the end in the European Union, and therefore it is to some extent natural that we have also somewhat lively public debate. However, in economic and financial affairs, I can only plead for stronger verbal discipline by all of us, me included, so that we can stick to our common line, stay on course, and avoid unnecessary speculation which could fuel misunderstandings and confusion.
What about the public? There's growing resistance to austerity measures, particularly in Greece. How do you deal with that?
Excuse me, I didn't hear.
The public resistance, yeah. Growing public resistance to these austerity measures and to these targets that you're setting forth. How do you deal with that?
I know that there is, in fact, two kinds of fatigue in Europe. There is a certain reform fatigue in southern European countries like Greece. On the other hand, there is a certain support fatigue in the central and northern EU member states, which have had to provide loans or guarantees to help Greece, Ireland and Portugal. My task is to build bridges and to facilitate common understanding, because we are really in the same boat. The main task of this is to safeguard financial stability in Greece and in Europe, and thus protect the economic recovery and facilitate sustained growth and job creation in Europe.
Is there any question in your mind about the Germans? Do they want to, we get these headlines that they would like to see from ministers, that they would like to see restructuring or some sort of quicker end game for Greece. Are you concerned about that?
We are working very closely with Germany and other EU member states, and our common line as the European Union is the one I expressed to you a few times, in fact, which is that we are exploring a Vienna-Style initiative to encourage banks on a voluntary basis to maintain their exposure in Greece. In that context, we are also examining the feasibility of voluntary rescheduling on the condition that it will not create a credit event. That is the line of the European Union, that is agreed among the finance ministers, and to my understanding all the member states are supportive of this line.
So what you're describing is not a haircut, just for clarification. In general, how are the health of the European banks?
It is certainly not a haircut, and restructuring is not in the cards.
Right.
As regards the European banks, this crisis has for a long time already been kind of a severely intertwined combination of a sovereign debt crisis in some countries and banking sector fragilities in several countries in Europe. And therefore it is important that the current round of bank stress tests will be conducted in a credible and convincing manner. And in parallel, the member states where there may be pockets of vulnerability in the banking sector or the financial system will present such remedial plans that will help to resolve these pockets of vulnerability, either through restructuring or recapitalization.
Is one of the reasons you are so adamantly against a restructuring because that could create a banking crisis?
It is one of the reasons we are, at least it would have a serious contagion effect and a negative chain reaction through the financial system in Europe and maybe globally. We see that a possible debt restructuring would have negative ramifications in the Greek financial system. It would lead to a chain reaction in the European financial system and most likely lead to a contagion effect concerning the other sovereigns. Therefore, I repeat, restructuring is not in the cards, it's not part of our plan.
Do you worry at all that there's a perception in the markets that the EU is behind the curve in the response to this crisis?
I'm trying my best, together with my partners, to be ahead of the curve.
Can the United States do more to support Europe in this crisis?
The best way the United States can support Europe is by ensuring that the economic recovery is maintained on a sustainable basis in the United States of America, which would have a positive impact into the whole global economy, the whole world economy. In addition to that, the United States has been very constructive and contributed positively to the resolution of the sovereign debt crisis in Europe. And in fact, I want to use this opportunity to thank our international partners for their solidarity and contribution to overcoming the sovereign debt crisis in Europe. We are not yet there, we have not yet finished the job, and there is quite some work still ahead of us, but at least we have prevented a financial meltdown like what happened after the Lehman Brothers collapse in the US in September 2008, and we have been able to contain the sovereign debt crisis to the three countries in the program, Greece, Ireland and Portugal. The job is not yet finished, and in June we have to take very important decisions in Europe in order to complete our work.
Have you been surprised at the relative economic outperformance of Eurozone? It's exceeded expectations as a whole.
I have not been surprised of that. To my mind, it's important to recall that while we are talking, like now we have talked 99% about the problems in the Eurozone, at the same time, in fact, the large majority of the Eurozone, especially the central and northern parts, as well as the, say, non-Euro area, Eastern Europe, are rebounding and recovering very well. The economic recovery is maintaining its momentum despite the sovereign turmoil or external turbulences related to the political changes in the Middle East and North Africa, or the natural and nuclear catastrophe in Japan. And in fact, in many countries we have seen very good figures of the first quarter this year, including Germany and France, which form the large core of the Eurozone. So the overall picture of the Eurozone reflects a certain dualism. On the one hand, there is a strong recovery in the large part of the Eurozone, while on the other hand we have a still ongoing sovereign debt crisis in some member states of the Eurozone.
How big of a boost would you say that China has been? It seems to be a key source of support for Europe and for the debt markets.
China has, to my mind, carried the kind of responsibility that is, say, consequential of its reinforced economic power in the global economy, and China has been a constructive partner of Europe in overcoming this crisis. I think it's very important that even when the, say, immediate global crisis has faded away compared to what was the situation in late 2008 or early 2009, we can maintain close cooperation in the global context through G20 and the IMF with our international partners. And I can say that during the stages of the Eurozone sovereign crisis, we have genuinely had support from our international partners, including the United States, including China, including, of course, the IMF.
Does it make it easier for you if you've expressed support for Christine Lagarde as the managing director? Does that make it easier for you to have a European in charge in fighting the debt crisis?
To my mind, the strongest argument in favor of Christine Lagarde is that she has shown very strong professional competence, and she is respected by her peers in the international community in G20 and the IMF, and she has been a formidable chairperson of G20 this year in the financial ministers level. I think these speak for her and for her candidacy and, if elected, success as managing director of the IMF.
Finally, did you ever think that we would be here 1 year later, that we would be in a situation where the interest rate was higher in Greece and where the country seemed closer to restructuring than ever after the $158 billion bailout 1 year ago?
Well, of course, I hoped that it would have a more rapid impact, but at the same time, I've always prepared to. I've always learned to prepare for worse scenarios as well, and now we just have to have the sufficient stamina to overlive the crisis, and I can reassure you that Europe will have more stamina than the crisis has, and we will be completing our work so that we can overcome the sovereign debt crisis and thus protect the ongoing economic recovery in the Eurozone and in Europe and in the global economy.
What is the worst now? What is the worst possible scenario that you're preparing for?
I keep that to myself. I think it's not very helpful. I rather prefer to take action and.
And do you have a message for all of the investors that are still shorting Greek bonds, Irish bonds, Portuguese bonds? There's so many of them.
Greece, Ireland, and Portugal are now in the EU IMF programs And for instance, concerning Greece, we are now in the final days of concluding the current quarterly review. Then we will see how this program will have to be revised, and we are ensuring that financial stability in Greece and Europe will be maintained, and we will thus facilitate the ongoing economic recovery in Europe and in the global economy. We will not let Greece down for the sake of Greece, nor for the sake of Europe.
Do we have a day? Do we know which day this week to expect the report?
Once it is ready. In the negotiations, sometimes deadlines are helpful, but in this case, I only say in the coming days because I want to ensure that the quarterly review will be concluded in a way that we can reassure all the EU member states and the IMF of the program being back on track and thus facilitating the disbursement in June.
Is Italy safe? Is it insulated from this crisis?
Italy is a country which did not enter into such fiscal stimulus like many other countries, and it has practiced prudent fiscal policy. Its problem is a high level of debt, but it has the right path of fiscal adjustment, and that's backed by concrete measures. Italy has challenges of structural reform, but at the same time one has to say that in fiscal terms Italy is on the right path.